In today's video, I'm going to show you my top tips for editing macro photos in Lightroom on the iPad. So I've done quite a few videos on iPad editing before, and I've also done quite a few videos on macro, so I thought let's combine the two and show how I would go about making my close-up imagery look even better in Lightroom on the iPad. I do love using Lightroom on the iPad. It's very, very fast. It's just as powerful as a desktop version, and of course it syncs with all my devices, so I can use it on my iPad, and then I can just keep on editing on my phone if I'm sitting on the train, and then I can work on it on my desktop when I get back home. So if you haven't given it a try, then it is worth seeing whether it's a good option for you. But I'm going to dive straight in and show you what I've done so far. I've pulled together a small collection of some macro images from a previous shoot that I've done. Now, when I'm importing my images on my iPad, I will always make sure to import them to a new album, which I will give a name, in this case, Macro Edits iPad, because it's for this video. So that way I can always go through and find where my photos are. You can see that everything is named. Otherwise, you've just got this one huge camera roll of thousands and thousands and thousands of images. Trying to go back and actually kind of find those older shots that you've got gets very, very complicated very quickly. So it's just a good habit to get into. Always import them into a new folder. That way everything's neat and organized. But we've got our shots here, and I've only imported a few, some fairly basic ones that I thought I'd show. So why don't we just dive straight in? Now, first of all, you'll see I am just using my hand. I am not using my Apple Pencil. I do have one, and I do use it sometimes. I use it for more detailed work if I'm like painting, lighting, that kind of thing. But for the most part, I do find that working with these sliders, I'm just a little bit more accurate using my finger. Yeah, of course, that does mean you end up getting smeary fingerprints all over your screen, but you just keep a little cleaning cloth handy. I think I've got one right here. So you can always just, give it a quick wipe down as you're going through your edit. So, it's just how I prefer to work. So let's start out with this shot, and it's just a nice shot of a flower. You can see that I've got a very, very shallow depth of field, which I quite like. Sometimes you can focus stack your images to make sure that everything is pin sharp front to back, but here I actually really like that we've just got this slither of focus right through the middle of the flower. We've got actually the stamen in the middle pin sharp, which I think is important. That's kind of like the eye of the flower, as it were. And like in portraiture, you would want to have the eye of your subject in focus. So I think that's the bit that needs to be in focus. But I like that we've got this fall off at the front with the petals and also at the back. Let's have a look at this shot though, because I tend to find that when I'm shooting in vertical that they always look a little bit too tall and narrow. So I'm going to change that crop to a 4:5. In so doing, it just pulls in the top and bottom, and I think makes it a little bit of a tighter frame. I'm also just going to drag it in a little bit here. I don't want to go too close because I think what's nice about this shot is having some more of that negative space, and I think this crop here is a little bit close for me. So I'm just going to pull it back out on all sides like this, bringing in some of these other leaves, which again kind of puts it in context of its environment, which I think is nice. Somewhere around here. And I think that's already a much nicer crop. It's just brought in some of that dead space. Our color is a little bit on the green side, so I'm just going to lift that slightly with the tint. And the temperature, I'm pretty much going to leave where it was, actually. I think that's looking okay. Exposure-wise, there's not really a whole lot that I think I need to do with this because it's already a decent exposure overall. It's quite a flat exposure, so we don't need to adjust too much for a harsh contrast. But I'm actually going to bring the shadows down just because I think it gives a little bit more depth. The highlights I'm going to leave where they are because they look fine, so why bother messing about? I'm going to pump up those whites just a small amount. It just gives a little bit more pop. But I think that's everything that I want to do. Look at that. Such a tiny shift, almost imperceptible so far, but I think we're on a good road here. But now I'm going to move to the color mix tool, also called the HSL or hue saturation luminance tool if you're working in Lightroom Classic. I will say before we go on that all of the tips I'm showing here on Lightroom Mobile or just Lightroom is exactly the same stuff that you can do in Lightroom Classic on your computer. It's also the exact same stuff that you can do in Camera Raw within Photoshop. So, you know, this is not specific to the iPad. I'm just showing you on my iPad. Okay, so I'm going to start off by grabbing that green color. And I'm just going to slightly change that hue downwards a little bit because that green is almost a bit overpowering. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do the same with those yellows and bring those down all the way. In fact, no, not quite all the way, but a long way, to turn them from sort of a greeny yellow much more into an orangey yellow. And as you can see, if I just turn that off and on, we've suddenly got a lot more separation in the background, which is now sort of an orangey tone rather than a greeny tone. I can bring those greens back and make it a bit more green, but yeah, not too much, somewhere around there. This is all adjust to taste. You know, this is an edit that I like, that I'm doing. It is not the way to edit your shots. It is not. There is never a one way to edit a photo. Keep that in mind, no matter what anyone tells you. There is no right or wrong. I'm going to up the luminance, and particularly pay attention when I do. And this is one of the reasons why I love working with like the color mix tool. This stamen in the middle, look, as I pump up that luminance, look how much they suddenly pop out of this scene. You know, down here at normal, they're quite dark. Obviously, if you take it down even further, they get very dark. Bring it up though, and they really, really stand out from the rest of that flower. I think it looks really, really nice. So I'm going to up those quite a bit. The greens I'm going to bring up a little bit too. But, you know, overall, I'm quite happy with how this looks. This is just a quick edit. I don't want to go into too much detail on this, but we've taken it from a bit of a grungy, mostly green image, and we've got a lot more contrast in there, a lot more separation of those colors. So I think that's looking pretty good. I'm going to move on. In fact, I'm going to move on to this one because I thought this one might be quite a nice example. I have done an edit on this one already. Oh, AirPods Max, go away. I've done an edit on this shot before, and it's one that I really liked. So I'm going to try and basically replicate that now. I'm going to start off by sort of straightening up this line. We've got this nice line of the fern here, which I think looks great, but I want that to almost basically be the horizon. So I'm going to turn that like this until we make that pretty much completely straight. But I'm also going to do a 1-to-1 crop on this, a square crop, and bring that right back up here. Because I think that's really focusing in on the important parts. It is that lovely, the lovely fern, but we've also just got this extra leaf peeking in the bottom third of the frame, which I just think looks really, really nice. So yeah, that's good for me. I'm going to increase that exposure. I'm going to increase the highlights a little bit and maybe bring down those shadows, up those whites, basically just bringing in a little bit more contrast, a little bit more punch. Again, most of my edits are going to be in the color mix. So with that yellow, we're going to bring it down, again, more towards the orange. And with the green, I'm actually going to bring that up quite a lot into much more of an emeraldy green. And now clearly right now, it looks ridiculous. It looks a toxic spill of green all over this image, having pushed that much more into the emerald. So we bring that saturation down. And as we do, it becomes much more of a natural tone again. It looks really nice. I think maybe gone a little bit too far, both sides on that. Something like this. So we've changed it from this yellowy, almost browny green into this sort of more emeraldy looking one. But in so doing, we've also allowed these little bits of orange on the leaves to stand out. So it's just about playing around with those color tones, not going too far, not making it too fantasy, very much keeping it within the realms of what is naturally there. It's just adjusting it so that you've kind of got like the look that you want. I don't think there's much more I actually really want to do to this. I'm just going to play though with putting in a linear gradient. So the new gradients they've put in a new way of doing it, and they've added some extra tools for you to adjust them, which is really helpful. Which brings Lightroom Mobile much more in line with Lightroom Classic, which is handy. But I can take the linear gradient, just bring one up here. and I'm going to bring that exposure down. And the reason being is that this leaf down here in this bottom corner was a little bit overpoweringly bright. It kind of detracts the eye from the rest of the scene. So by just darkening down this corner, it provides a natural vignette, and it allows your eye to go more into the middle, more into where like the focus of the image is. So I'm going to go about there with that quite a bit. And if I had a bit more time, or if I wanted to spend more time rather, I think I might get a brush and I'd maybe paint in a little bit of extra exposure. Basically do a little bit of dodging and burning, just try and sculpt out, just gently painting in some hints of light on these leaves. Again, this is very, very rushed. I might take maybe a few minutes over this rather than a few seconds to paint this in, and then you can paint this a little bit more. So it just carves out where that light already is. It just emphasizes it a little bit more. So, you know, it sort of makes a bit of a difference. So if we just go before and after, you can see that we've got much more of a dynamic image. We've got more interesting colors going on. I think it's looking a bit better. Let's go on to another one then. Let's take a look at this insert. There's a couple of these that I picked out because I wanted to make sure that I had one that was sort of nicely in focus. And I think this one is a favorite of mine in particular. If we zoom in, again, like I was saying before about having the eye in focus, that's absolutely what we've got here. This little eye, it hasn't loaded in quite properly yet, so it's still looking a little bit fuzzy on my screen, but the proper version actually should be nice and pin sharp on that eye. It's a bit annoying really because I loaded these images into the desktop version, and so this is trying to pull this original file from that backup. So you know, it's taking its sweet old time for some reason. Anyway, irrelevant. My point is that it's the eye, again, that you need to have in focus because that is your subject. You want the eye to be nice and pin sharp. And for me, I like using that depth of field to really isolate the subject. So you can see that it's on a leaf. We've got this little bit of kind of leaf matter here, but almost all of it is out of focus, and that really allows the bug itself to stand out in this scene. And it doesn't matter to me that the back part of the bug, the end of like its abdomen and its tail is out of focus because it just adds to that depth. Let's bring in this crop quite a bit closer because we want that bug to fill the frame a little bit more, but still leaving that negative space that puts it in context. If you just cropped in on the bug only, then you lose its environment, and that's important to put it within the context of where it actually is. So I think something like this, I'm going central framing. I'm not trying to put it off to the left third or the right third, right in the middle, and that allows that leaf that you can just see that line to cut through, right through the image, which I think looks particularly nice. But exposure, I think I'm going to leave for now. I'm going to go straight into that color mix because this is where we're going to need to do some work because, again, all of those colors are kind of blending into one vague shade of yellowy green. We've got yellowy green on the bug. We've got yellowy green leaf. So we need to do a little bit of adjusting to give some separation here. So by bringing these yellows down into more of an orangey tone, it's not a big shift, but it's just enough. As I push that down, look how much more this bug stands out from its background. It's a really, really powerful tool. I'm going to increase that luminance slightly. I think we've got a little bit of orange in there, just a hint in its tail and in this little bit of its back that's sort of catching in those water droplets. And again, you know, I don't want to go too far. I don't want it to look bright pink like that, but just enough that, again, it makes it stand out from the rest of the bug. I think that looks really, really nice. And then let's grab our green and do the same thing that we did before. Lift it up into the emeralds and then just slightly tone down that saturation. Maybe lift the luminance a little bit. And straight away, look at that. That was a few seconds work, but we've gone from a whole mess of colors, and now we've got something that looks, I think, a lot nicer. The bug really stands out. I would do some more work using the brush tool, but this hasn't really popped into focus yet, and I don't know why it hasn't properly loaded in. Again, bit annoying, but fine. What I would do is get my radial gradient, and I would put it in and turn it like this, probably bring it up. A big radial gradient like this over its eye and a little bit over this part of its body that's in focus. I might just slightly increase that exposure, and I would go to effects and I would slightly increase that texture. And as I do, if I just pump this up and down like that, you can see how much more detail and like contrast it's adding to that part of the bug. So when you view it in full screen, you've suddenly got even more sharp detail on that eye, which I think looks great. So yeah, I really like this. I don't think there's anything more I would want to do to this shot at all, because it's a natural scene, and I just think it looks really, really nice as it is. This was a handheld quick snap of a bug. It wasn't a big staged scene, so I quite like sort of being quite gentle with the edits, just allowing it to really shine. So yeah, let's move on to another bug. It is a different one, not quite the same one. This one doesn't have the water on it. And straight away, there's a few things we can do here. We can bring up some of these shadow details, because it is a very, very dark scene with a big bit of contrast here. Bring the highlights down on the bug itself. Is this popped into focus? No, same thing. Maybe there's something I'm doing. Who knows? Again, 4:5 crop. I don't want to go 1:1 square on this one necessarily, because again, I like having it in the context of its environment. I like having a little bit of that negative space at the top and the bottom. But I'm going to put this not quite center, but not quite in the bottom. I don't want it on the bottom thirds line. I want it basically a little bit above it. Something like this, I think, is a really, really nice crop. In our color, we can adjust that tint upwards slightly, just adding in a little bit more of a purple hue, because it is very, very green. But again, we're going to adjust that mostly in our color mix. Same thing that we did with the previous bug one, bringing those yellows down, making them a little bit more orangey. But I'm seeing actually that it's easy to go too far here, because we've got a lot of yellow underneath the bug. Once we start to go too far, look, it becomes very orange, very weird. So it really is about just pushing that slider more and more and more and more and more until you see it go wrong. And that is pretty much how I work with most of my edits. I will experiment. I will drag the slider one way, drag it the other way, see what it actually does to your image. And that way you know exactly what it is you want to do. So I can see that I don't want to go too far. So somewhere about here is a nice happy medium. It's just giving it that little edge, but it's not too much. So -26, all we need. Also going to bring down that luminance a little bit, because it is the yellows that are quite overpoweringly bright there. With the greens, I'm going to bring those up again, and I'm also going to bring that saturation down slightly. And again, just look how much it's already popping off that page. It looks amazing. And if we bring that luminance up, if I just pulse that up, look how much that bug is like standing out. If we bring that up, doesn't that look great? So nice. Okay, the oranges we can stand to bring down a little bit, because most of these like tips, the tips is mostly orange. So if we bring that down, we bring it into this like really nice rich red color, which really, really stands out against the green of the rest of the bug, against those yellows. Again, we can increase that luminance, maybe increase the saturation a little bit. Look at that. Just a few tweaks, and it stands out so much more. I'm really, really pleased with how this looks. What I could do in this shot is go into color and go into color grading. Now, color grading allows you to add different color tones in the shadows, in the midtones, and in the highlights. It can be a really good tool for giving your images quite a cinematic look. I don't necessarily want to do that here, but I'm going to give it a try just so that you can see how that tool works and how you might apply it. So I think adding in some sort of cooler blue tones into those shadows actually looks quite nice. If we just go before, we can't go before and after with this, but fine. And then maybe in the highlights, I could add in a little bit of warmth. So adding in a little bit of warmth actually does emphasize that nice highlight that we've got on the left side of the bug. So, because I think that looks pretty good. So if I go off the color grading tool and we look at our before and after, it's a big difference, but it hasn't taken us very long. We haven't had to use different bits of software. We haven't had to go into Photoshop. It hasn't had to be desktop only. It is just on our iPad. I could have done this on the bus, on the train, on the plane. It's so easy to do. You know, it is great. But I'm going to call it a day there. Basically, the point I wanted to get across is how easy it is to kind of do these edits on your iPad. At the moment, I'm using the larger iPad M1. I also do my editing on a smaller iPad, including the iPad mini. I also do plenty just on my phone, you know, so it's not about having a massive screen. It's not about having the most powerful computer around to do these things. You know, my phone copes perfectly well editing raw files from my Canon 5D4. So you can really achieve so much without, you know, going absolutely nuts on the computer that you've got. But I hope this has been helpful. If you have enjoyed this video, do please hit that like button. Consider subscribing if you don't already, and I will see you next time.